welcome back. What is a non-binary, and are you non-binary, and how do you tell? You may be non-binary if you don't feel that your gender is either masculine or feminine, or you don't identify with the gender you've been assigned at birth. Many non-binary people reject gender roles and the characteristics attached to them. Humans throughout history have observed patterns among our species and others to more easily group and distinguish between similar and different traits. These groupings are often binary in nature, meaning that they relate to or involve two things. Sometimes these two things are positioned as mutually exclusive or in opposition to one another. An example of these socially constructed and systematically reinforced groupings are the seemingly dominant gender categories of man and woman. Now, this will upset people, but gender and sex have always been separate, and gender has always been a construct. There have always been people whose existence and lived experiences don't fit neatly into these gender categories, regardless of whether history books and other institutions recognizes it. Here's what you need to know. Non-binary is both an umbrella term encompassing many gender identities and singular gender identity label. As a singular gender identity, non-binary describes genders that exist outside of the binary, or that can't be described as exclusively woman or man. It's important to note that non-binary is a gender identity, not a form of gender expression. It tells you something about who a person is, not about what they might look like. Non-binary people can have presentations and expressions that are gender conforming, gender non-conforming, masculine, feminine, androgynous, fluid. There isn't one specific way to be looked or act non-binary. Non-binary identity provides a framework for understanding and celebrating nuance and complex experiences of gender that aren't rooted in assigned sex or fall outside of binary gender traits, expectations, norms, and stereotypes. Although the term non-binary has become more commonly used in the past decade, non-binary identities and non-binary people have been around for centuries. Non-binary gender has been recorded as far back as 400 BC to 200 AD, when Hijaras, people in India, who identified as having both masculine and feminine traits, were referenced in ancient Hindu texts. Early documentation of non-binary genders is more commonly found in indigenous and non-Western cultures, some of which use trigender and polygender systems for categorizing and understanding people's genders. It's probably because Western's Christianity, I don't know. European colonizers forced a white-centered binary construction of sex-based gender identity and expression onto indigenous people in a violent attempt to invalidate their lived experiences. Sounds familiar. Another motivator to erase this vital and rich part of cultural history that teaches that non-binary genders are naturally occurring and should be celebrated. Binary gender has been used to oppressed communities and cultures across time. Again, sounds familiar. Behave. Terminology such as two-spirit, which falls under the non-binary umbrella and should only be claimed by indigenous people, gives indigenous communities a way to revive histories and affirm their cultural roles and identities outside of the white Eurocentric notions of woman and man. There are many more labels that fall within the non-binary umbrella, and not all of them are culture specific. This quickly expanding set of vocabulary provides many people with the opportunity to locate and validate their personal and cultural experience of gender while communicating it to others. So where do gender roles come in? Gender roles are the behaviours, presentations, stereotypes, acceptable traits and norms society ascribes to someone based on their perceived or assigned sex or gender. A non-binary framework for understanding gender is founded on the notion that sex-based labels assigned at birth, such as male, female, girl or boy, don't determine your interests, mannerisms, behaviour, self-expression, core of self. So, can anyone be non-binary? Well, anyone whose gender identity or experience can't be exclusively captured by using the terms man or woman can identify as non-binary. Although non-binary people can personally self-define this term with slight variation, it's most often used to describe experiences that encompass both masculine and feminine traits, don't align with the sex-based and gender-based attributes imposed at birth. What this might look like in practice? In practice, being non-binary looks like having a core sense of self that can't be exclusively described as a man or woman, and using language that respects and sees your personhood first and foremost. One person who's non-binary might need access to a gender-neutral restroom, while another non-binary person might prefer to use a sex-segregated space based on safety, convenience, access and comfort. As mentioned before, there isn't one way or a right way to be non-binary. Being non-binary is about knowing yourself and doing what's right for you. So, do we have to use specific pronouns? The gender identity label a person uses to describe himself doesn't necessarily tell you what pronouns to use. Here's a list in no particular order of pronouns non-binary people commonly use. Gender-neutral pronouns such as they, them and theirs. Neo-pronouns such as ze, her, hers and ze, zes. Sorry, it's Norwegian, I can't pronounce. Binary pronouns such as she, hers and him, he, him and his. Multiple sets of pronouns such as she, they or he, they are pronouns so as long as they're used respectively. Some non-binary people don't use any pronouns at all. Some feel most affirmed and respected when only be referred to as their name. That's what I do with my friends, what my friends do with me, to be fair. When I learned this, it oddly aligned with how I felt. For example, I am Tristan. I don't care about my pronouns or my gender. And at most times, people use my name. They hardly really ever use my pronouns. Kind of lines with what I just said earlier, isn't it? No matter your gender identity, it can be a good idea to introduce yourself to others with your name and pronouns. This may prompt others to share theirs. If someone doesn't share their pronouns freely, you should respect their decision and avoid pressing the subject further. If you're unsure of what terminology to use in a given situation, deferring to the gender-neutral language is typically, though not always, experienced as an inclusive effort. What makes this different from being genderqueer or gender fluid? The umbrella term non-binary includes gender identities such as genderqueer, gender fluid, which results in some overlap and similarities among the terms. Genderqueer can refer to both gender non-conforming identity and gender expression. Unlike non-binary, both the word itself and associated identity are centred around being queer. Gender fluid can also refer to gender identity or expression. It often involves the experience of moving between genders or having a gender or presentation that changes over a particular period of time. For example, a person's gender identity or expression can change from moment to moment, day to day, month to month, year to year, or decade to decade. Unlike non-binary, gender fluid conveys specific information about the evolving nature of gender over time. Someone might opt to use the term non-binary over others because it has become more recognisable and Googleable than many of the more specific gender identities under the umbrella. As a result, using this term might be a clear and effective way of communicating something about a core part of oneself that's complex and nuanced and sometimes hard to explain. How do you know if it's the term for you? Non-binary gender might be for you if you resonate with any of the above, experience your gender as both masculine and feminine, don't identify with the sex-based categories or gender expectations assigned to you. Non-binary gender provides people with a space to explore and actualize an identity and expression in a way that feels aligned with their core sense of self. Hence why Demi Lovato became non-binary and went back to being a woman. She was exploring, gave her that room. What happens if you no longer feel like this term fits? Sometimes people identify with the term non-binary in the long term, while others identify with it for a period of time in the process, short term, of exploring or understanding their gender with greater clarity. If you feel like this term no longer fits, it probably means you gained some helpful information about yourself along the way. Figuring out why these shifts occur can be both challenging and anxiety-provoking. Most often finding the answer involves reflection about your sense of self, what gender means to you, how gender relates to your entire personhood, how gender relates to your experience in your body, how gender relates to your experience in the world. How can you support the non-binary people in your life? If you know someone who's exploring their gender or who identifies as non-binary, you can support them by checking in to find out the ways they want you to be supportive, while simultaneously respecting and protecting their boundaries, right to time and privacy. Remember, some people are more comfortable sharing than others. Not everyone wants to speak openly about their gender and pronouns upon request. People typically share when they're ready and will let you know if they want you to inform or correct others. Where can you learn more? If you want to learn more about gender, there are many online resources out there. For example, Non-Binary Wiki is a wiki type site that includes a lot of information relating to gender identities. Genderqueer.me has a thorough list of resources on gender identity and related topics. Book Riot has a list of books about gender identity, including both fiction and non-fiction books. But anyway, I hope this video was insightful and maybe some of it applies to you. If you like this video, hit the like, and if you're new to the channel, then please subscribe, and because it'd be great to have you here. And so with that, next time, take care and be well.